everybody. It is Mike Levin on Saturday, really just past midnight, on October 30th, 2021. And I just dropped my kid off after a glorious 8-day vacation in the West Coast, Southern California, the Anaheim area, Disneyland, and Laguna Beach and Crystal Cove State Park Reserve. We got to the Pacific Ocean a couple of times. The first time on our arrival, and we just went to Laguna Beach. Not long after, we learned that there was an oil spill about a week prior, and most of the cleanup had occurred, but there's still the occasional oil blob, and there were signs up for it, but on our time there, I really didn't see any of the oil, so I guess we sort of got off easy there, and we were able to see the Pacific Ocean without having to take that extra drive that we thought we might have to the San Diego area if we went south, or even quite a bit further if we go north. And on our second time to the Pacific, we did it at the end of our vacation, so it was a bunch of Disney days in the middle and a couple of Pacific Ocean anchor days at each end. A brief stop at the beginning and a more prolonged stop at the end when we went to that state park, Crystal Cove, where there's an actual cave on the beach. It's really amazing, like out of a storybook or something. And that, along that stretch of beach, because it's also a nice beach, and there's some nice cliff areas, and it's a beautiful, natural spring area. So you have freshwater springs or streams coming right into the ocean at that point, with these, grassy marshlands, which are, federally protected, state protected, whatever it is, the national park system. So it's this beautiful ecosystem with all kinds of wildlife, lizards, hummingbirds. And on the nearby stretch of beach, which you have to sort of walk down this precarious, straight out of J.R. Tolkien's story, kind of cliff edge trail. Not really that steep, but it gives you kind of that feeling to get to a stretch of beach which takes you to the cave. And along that stretch of beach, my daughter got stung by a stingray. And she came running out of the water, and lo and behold, there was this tiny barb about 1 inch long with about an 1/8 of an inch of the tip embedded in her foot. And I saw immediately it was barbed. And I was like, I can keep this thing hanging in here and have it, ramping up the anxiety, maybe going deeper, or I can just, and I did. And I pulled it out, and there was a tiny little bit of blood, and it stopped soon, and we ran fresh water over it, wrapped a sock over it, while I ran up to get help. And I have to tell you, boy, this tested me. These kinds of things test what you're made of. And I basically ran down one of the lifeguard trucks and inadequately described where my people were. I left my daughter with my wife Natalie, waiting for help, me to go get help on this, national, state park stretch of Pacific Ocean beach, where it's not like there's lifeguards stationed, along there. They're driving up and down in their trucks on the closest driving access roads, which don't really get down to the beach, although they do have some way they do it, because by the time I did finally get the second person, because I hopped in my car at that point, I realized, I went back to my people, said, did the guy come? And they're like, no. So the second time out, and this is where I messed up, I didn't do it optimized. The right thing would be to have jumped immediately to my car, and with the power of the automobile, go to the entrance of the state park and have the person with a radio properly radio it in. But instead, I waved down a truck, told them where, and then went back to my people. All this extra running and walking, but boy, I'll tell you, I took my socks off to wrap it around my daughter's ankle. And so I was doing all this running in my shoes without socks, with the sand, and it was a test. But at any rate, once I properly had it radioed in, by the time I got back down to my people for the second time, they were already being carried away to the local facilities of this quaint little old historic town. I mean, I don't even think there's driving access to get down to this thing. You have to take a trolley. You pay $1.50 per person each way, or you can walk and go under the tunnel, under the road of the highway, or I think there's a passage over it. So there's a few ways to get down there, but by this time I was very fatigued, so I reparked the car in the correct parking lot and took the trolley down and met up with my daughter and Natalie, where she was having her foot soaked in the hot water, which is the treatment for a stingray sting. And so the pain was going away, and whatever swelling there was quite minimal, and she's doing just fine now. But it was an interesting experience. I promised her one of her Alice in Wonderland style adventures. With her being at this age, everything is highly imprinting. Every experience she has, tests a little bit of who she is, tests it and helps determine it. And boy, is she consistent with her self-image. Are they consistent with their self-image? I got to get my pronouns right. I say my daughter, I'll say my child. She'll watch this someday and be raging mad that I don't have my pronouns right. Well, we all have a lifetime of habits we need to get under control, where we base our pronouns purely on hardware that is obvious from the cues of our eyeballs, and not based on how people identify. So, yes. I wonder if one day they will ever be looking back at these videos, reminiscing of the old man after having dropped them off after a long and quite successful holiday. Now, the story behind this vacation is that we tried to do VidCon 2021 in Anaheim, which was canceled. But meanwhile, we had gotten the bed and breakfast reservations. We got the flight reservations on Spirit. Oh, a whole nother story. Did they bait and switch us? We reserved 2 direct flights on Spirit, and then they rearranged everything so that they were 2 layovers in Atlanta, with the return layover being 7 hours. A 7-hour wait layover after an 8-day, cross-country trip? I think not. So I basically canceled that return flight on Spirit. The prices were good, but they nickel and dime you with every little thing. So by the time they nickeled and dimed us, adding insult to injury on the bait and switch, we would have spent as much as if we went with a, larger, more reputable airline. And so I did rebook, and I did a direct flight one way with American Airlines. I paid a little extra money for good seats, a little extra money for checking all our bags in. One of our bags was overweight. They charge you $100 extra for an overweight bag on check-in, even after having paid the $30 to check it in. So the airlines really, really ream you on every little thing. So I am not currently an experienced traveler. Over my life, sure, especially with Scala and Commodore before that. I did a lot of traveling for business, maybe a little bit with 360i and the various marketing agencies. I have had quite a few lives. Woo! I could have been a scientist. I probably should have been a scientist, but I'm happy with my life, so who's to say should have? I can say could have. I covet the work of many scientists going on today, both the stuff that's in the public eye and the stuff that's probably very secret. I very much covet the particle physics breakthroughs that are being made possible now through a combination of the large LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, but also just the inevitable crossover of more efficient manufacturing techniques, smaller, nanoscale manufacturing of processors, and materials becoming more and more magical, precise milling of parts being more and more precise, and devices like the magic wands of the modern smartphones coming into our lives. It's really very miraculous being part of this global nervous system, global digital nervous system, mostly private in nature. While portions of it are public infrastructure, really the internet's made up of a lot of private interconnecting parts. And so the global digital nervous system is very private industry in nature. A lot of the data is owned by the data centers of Google and Microsoft and Facebook and Amazon, and they have these deep, rich histories on the people and the machines that are out there. Very much Big Brother in reverse these days. It's happened where we turn the cameras towards ourselves and shoot videos like this that we turn around and share. And yes, it is very much after the fact. The vacation has happened, it's over, and this is a banking the success video. You sometimes look over an experience like that and you get very reflective of how things could have gone very much worse. They always could go better, some optimization of some experience, some minimizing the time you could have spent waiting in some line or waking up earlier, or there's always some little optimization you could do. However, life is too short to live optimized. Sometimes you've just got to move forward, keep moving forward. I had a friend, I guess he's still a friend, I'm in connection with him on Instagram, Mike Welsh, and his motto always was keep moving forward. And he was a runner, or is a runner, and I saw him post a lot of that Instagram stuff. And you got to admire it, it's life is lived from the moment of the now forward. What's happened to you and led you to where you are? Well, it led you to where you are. You acknowledge it. If you like having the opportunity in life where you are, which I think everyone really should, the odds against each of us being here in our respective experiences, well, the odds are colossally against it. You read things like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which has a lot of very, very deep channeling. And you see the kind of wisdom in thinking about how very, very improbable you are. How very improbable your particular life experience is, what led you to being here, the various tiny different ways things could have gone, the butterfly effect in the past, and how many compounded, unlikely butterfly effects led to you being you and you being here right now. And it's very deeply humbling. And it makes you put regrets in perspective because, you know, as Frank Sinatra would say, you know, regrets, I've got a few, but they're, what is it, too few to mention. Can't linger on the past. You know, the past will paralyze you and make you sorrowful and it's not that it's about optimizing your now moment. I'm not a big believer in optimizing, but it will keep you at very least from stumbling through the now moment and having that, you know, improbable and, you know, likewise incredibly valuable, because along with the improbability of it, there's an inverse relationship. The more improbable something is, the more also valuable it is. I would say because of scarcity of experiences, scarcity of high-level, abstract, human-like experiences. There's a few billion of them going on in parallel right now, somewhere between 7 and 8 billion parallel human experiences, where the experience is greatly meta in nature, where the form of life can reflect about its own life using tools such as spoken and written language to do that reflection. That is a large part of what makes us uniquely human, because even though other animals have high-level abstractions and language, they don't put it all together quite the way humans do to make, like, books that can be handed down with technological techniques. Tech makes humans human. Humans and technology are inextricable. And yes, while chimpanzees can peel the leaves and bark off of a stick to shape it for probing at the termites, and otters can pick the right kinds of rocks for smashing against clams to open them, and tool making is, and even transgenerational knowledge and language is within the capabilities of non-human animals, and thus some level of sentience and autonomy and all these attributes we attribute to humans. They're there in other animals, but the feedback loop, that meta thought processes enabled by language, are just not there. It's not the meta-ness of it, the eddy storm of self-aware ability to change behavior based on observations, etc., just isn't there with other animals the way it is with humans. And even with humans, and this is where I'll wrap this around, I'm about 20 minutes into the video, it's going pretty well. I started talking about how we went off for the Disneyland adventure, and I realized afterwards that Disneyland is the original. That came some 15 years before Disney World. And while Disney World was the extravagant one where they did everything more the way Walt Disney wanted it to, Disneyland was the old school experiment. So there's that statue of Walt Disney standing there with Mickey. And, you know, there's the Tomorrowland, which is that iconic view of the, you know, rocket ship rides that go around in circles that I think the movie was based on. And there's so much old school, truly iconic Disney around there that has not been renovated, that has not been brought to the very most modern, the way Disney World has been. So Splash Mountain, I believe, in Disney World has been changed to some other theme. I forget what it was, the Frog Princess or something. But it was no longer Song of the South. Arguably very racist, a glorified image of a slave and and a caretaker of children, an Uncle Tom character, who sings the Zippity-Doo-Dah song that is so ingrained in our culture now. So the hardcore Disney traditionalists or purists are apparently keeping that alive. So we went through the Splash Mountain exhibit. Oh my God, me personally, it must have been 5 times total. Once on one of our first Disney days, and then 4 consecutive times on our second day there. Boy, that kid loves the Splash Mountain ride. And we've got a lot of our pictures, those iconic Splash Mountain pictures when you go over that edge. I bought a few of those on their new system. Oh, their new system, it's so interesting. Mobile phones really are changing everything. One of my big observations about this Disneyland trip is that in many cases, if not all, the things people are doing in line waiting for the exhibit are technologically more advanced and engaging, mentally stimulating, than whatever this exhibit is that you're waiting for, that has animatronics, singing and dancing, It's a Small World, whatever, which is a little bit passé compared to modern movies and special effects and video games and the average smartphone. So it's a little bit humbling that the magic has so permeated our lives. Getting back to that original point, or the recurring point of all my videos, the time of magic is upon us. Arthur C. Clarke's approximate quote that any technology sufficiently advanced will be indistinguishable from magic is most certainly upon us, and we're seeing corporate spells being cast of group consciousness and digital nervous systems. The people who know most are likely the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Apples, and of course certain branches of the U.S. government, which are tapped into a lot of these things as well. And so privacy is an illusion in this digital nervous system world. However, the need to maintain that illusion is actually quite high. The trust being put into the cloud such that business that runs on trust can be conducted is high enough that the cloud providers want to make sure that things work properly, that best practices are adhered to, that security is maintained, that accidental security breaches and data leaks are kept to a minimum, and so that the new engine of economy keeps running smoothly, and the sieve, the shakedown machine to get a portion of all of our incomes, keeps running efficiently, and that as citizens we have our various corporate affiliations. We are mostly Amazon / Google / Apple person. You know, I would probably be me. I'm equal parts Apple for the hardware of my phones. I still think iPhones are best. Although this Pixel 6 they're advertising is once again giving me a chance, incentive to give Android phones a chance again on a spec phone, on a Google Android specifications. This is how good the experience can be phone. I've never had it. I've never had a Pixel. I've been tempted since the first ones came out. I've been on a Nexus 7 tablet, so I've been on Google's early tablet Android devices, little competitors to the iPad, but not really competitor, cheaper, but not the same experience at all. Then I moved to the Samsung Note series. I started out on the Note 3, then I went to the Note 5, and then I went to the Note 8. I skipped over the exploding lithium battery Note 7, and I believe the 8 was delivering a quality level of product versus what you paid that was unrivaled in electronics history. I just love it. The 4,096 levels of pressure sensitive Wacom stylus that never needs to be charged, that slides into the phone and sits flat. There's been like pen gates and stuff over the Notes because the pens could be slipped in upside down, which caused it needing to be brought in for repair. So Samsung has had its share of faux pas. The TouchWiz user interface never really was worth the deviation from stock Android. However, it brought so many S Pen integration features that it was worth using, and so there's this schism in the Android world over the S Pen, because there's a lot of people like me who are big fans of the S Pen. Steve Jobs used to say, God gave us the pointer, it's the finger. But what he was really doing is he was flipping us the other finger, because humans use tools, even those chimpanzees who shape the sticks to probe for the termites. So styluses, styli, the pens, provide some level of precision that humans like. Humans like pointers better than our fingers. We gave up finger painting as precision tools a long time ago, so why should we give it up with our phones? So I really liked the Samsung implementation of the stylus in the Note line. And I may still go back to that someday. I've certainly been tempted by whatever these latest things are. It looked like the Note 20, if I remember the numbers. I know there was a Note 10 not long ago, but these numbers seem to be skyrocketing, and these models of Androids are going crazy, like the Fold, the Samsung, again, is Samsung Galaxy Fold, where it folds in the middle. So the future is upon us, both in the hardware and the software. There is a deep root of free and open source software at the heart of it, the engine that's driving everything. Even on the Apple side, they're derived from Berkeley, Unix. While proprietary at times, there is now fully free and open source Berkeley derivatives, including Apple's own Darwin, which they've contributed back, because there need to be API hooks to all the Apple hardware. So it can't just be stock Unix that it's on. They need enough modifications, and because of the GPL license, it's got to be contributed back if you make commercial gains based on it. So Apple, just like in its day, TiVo was forced to contribute stuff back and predicated the GPL3 license where you don't have to. And like Cisco, not Cisco, but back then it was Linksys, the Linksys router, the WRT series of routers. They were forced to contribute their modifications back. So this is kind of what's at the heart of driving so much of the web and internet infotech explosion. First, there was the proprietary Unixes, which were Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie's answer to this very dark overlord operating system of Multics that was coming down the pike from General Electric, AT&T, Bell Labs, Honeywell, and all the big time-sharing supercomputer companies were in on it. And it was a very bleak looking future. So as a bad boy project in the halls of Bell Labs, Ken Thompson, empowered by Dennis Ritchie, who did the C operating system, which was derived from BCPL, which is where all these virtual machine compiling techniques of the machine instructions was innovated. So if people think, oh, virtual machines, that was invented by the JRE, the Java Runtime Engine, by Sun Microsystems with Java back in the 90s. Well, no, not really. It powered the whole digital age explosion, mostly through the BCPL and then the C compiler for compiling Unix on different hardware platforms. And that was black box reverse engineered a couple of times after it got entangled in legal intellectual property battles. Those were the notorious SCO Unix lawsuits. That intellectual property passed from hand to hand, down from Bell Labs to Novell. The old networking people, I think, owned it for a while, Novell. And then SCO that bought it from Novell, or was part of its spun off assets after bankruptcy, whatever. I forget the exact details, but it was overtaken by events. It became OBE because everything about the Berkeley system, BSD, Berkeley System Distribution, was black box reverse engineered in free BSD, free Berkeley System Distribution. And Linus Torvalds has been quoted as saying if he knew that effort was going on, he would not have done Linux himself. So what makes Linux so different from these, re-engineered Unix distros is the licensing and the encouraging of taking it and using it for free, contributing back. And so whereas Unix showed the way, Linux opened the door and made it a party for everybody, with liberal licensing, with meta. We're talking about the meta of the human experience. There's some parallel, some self-similarity stuff going on with Linux. The licensing makes software, in a sense, self-aware. It is distributed with a certain built-in awareness of how it can be picked up and used again by other sentients that encounter it. And so Linux has a way of spreading like a virus. That Unix is a virus is not a unique observation. You should read the Unix Haters Handbook, which surprisingly came out as early as the 90s. You think that by the mid-90s, the web was really starting to happen. So in the early 90s, was it still the heyday of old school Unix before Linux? Wasn't that played out in the 80s in academia? Well, no, not really. Unix was reaching its peak with all these different Unix foundations and standardizations and Unix System 5 Release 4, just before the LAMP problem, the LAMP, Linux, Apache, MyPHP, and or MySQL and PHP, the LAMP stack that fueled the web came along. Immediately prior to that, it was kind of like standardization of Unix on POSIX compliant and various industry standard Unixes that made a tool set that you could reliably compile your software on different hardware platforms. And see, the advantage of that slipped right over into the Linux world because the compiling tool chain is very much the same. In fact, the dominant tool chain came from the Linux world, and I believe even now in the Unix world they use GCC. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the GNU GCC compiler, GNU C compiler, something like that, is the preeminent toolchain compiler of C code. There's something called the virtual machine LV something. I got to get it all straight. But there are standards now for doing that C compiling stuff so that it goes cleanly on different hardware platforms, so that the binaries are most highly compatible between different hardware platforms, because this trick of distributing software is really becoming popularized, of just throwing in the binary for every hardware platform and using a wheel system to just swap out the correct binary. I was doing this with Linux many years ago. It's part of the reason why it's still getting likes and downloads, because 20 megabytes expanding to maybe 60 megabytes. It's doing some pretty miraculous things using some of the old QEMU binaries that were out there, and very popular just through, time. And many of the things that drive my field, my industry, you have some common resource out there on a unchanging URL for a long enough period of time, and you've got a world trend. This happened with things like PuTTY. The PuTTY terminal program is something that is, universally, we say universally, but is globally used, and, a backup tool in everybody's toolbox. If you're on a Windows style x86 machine and you have to SSH into some box, you pretty much know you can Google up a copy of PuTTY32 or PuTTY64.exe, drop it on your machine and be SSHing into any remote machine and be in business. And there's a handful of tools like that out there, of which these particular QEMU binaries, I would consider some of them. And you mix them together in a magic cocktail, and you have an old school approximation of what the modern wheel system, built into things like the Python packaging index, have become. Binaries that target different abstract hardware platforms, x86, 64-bit, ARM, 64-bit these days. These are becoming the more popular platforms. I guess ARM for Apple might be distinct from ARM for x86 style software. That's interesting, because Microsoft's been doing all this ARM stuff long before Apple, but Apple, because of its M1 processor, hogs all the glory because of how well optimized they did it right out of the gate. So Microsoft took a slightly longer, more plodding TikTok approach. But it's going to pay off in the end. Both paths to ARM64 will end up highly optimized, and the Apple M1 advantage will completely go away through, economies of scale. And, well, yeah, that's basically it. ARM64 on the x86 emulation side will just be optimized out the wazoo. All the wheel systems will kick in to create an optimized binary, and there's a lot of sandboxing too in these new wheel scenarios. So once you're pulling your binaries out of a wheel system, you might as well be running it in some either virtualized or containerized virtual environment, so that you carry all your dependencies with you, with several lines of defense. One line of defense of carrying your dependencies with you is the wheel system itself, because a lot of your dependencies are compiled into the binary. There's a lot of terminology surrounding this in the C compiling world, because resources either become linked or embedded. I forget all these technical terms, but the more dependencies that your software uses that get embedded into the distributable package, the better, because the more likely your software is to run in the different places it'll be dropped into, at the mere cost of more hard drive space. And what does hard drive space mean in these days of increasingly unlimited capacity, right? So you might as well carry around the dependencies for 2 or 3 different hardware platforms, no matter what hardware platform you're actually on, in case an instance of this, cloud drive gets pulled up on some different hardware. Your software will run just the same. And isn't that a beautiful vision? Isn't that a great place for things to be going? I certainly think it is. I'm getting more and more comfortable in these environments too, and more at home with the lowest common denominator that cuts across hardware platforms and cuts across, well, a lot of things, and cuts out a lot of vendor dependencies. I'm learning that one of the key vibes, one of the key spirits of our age in technology is the battle by the vendors for your heart. For your heart and your mind and your habits and your muscle memory. I see good friends of mine, to great effect, getting wrapped into the Google Cloud platform trap. Now, to the credit of these types of people, they're power tool users. So the learning curve is lower, and the reward and the benefit of being on these systems is higher. You produce more in shorter order, and who doesn't want that? However, you become dependent on these power tools, and if you wish to switch, there's a migration of your work issue. It's going to be tough to migrate your work between cloud platforms. You don't take something that you built on Firebase and seamlessly transition it over to some Amazon infrastructure. It's just not going to work that way. There may be some relatively loose equivalency mappings between Amazon and Google Cloud Platform services, except there's going to be some significant recoding to make the same functionality port over. The assumptions, the first principles behind these systems often change, acidic base issues, that kind of stuff. So I'm a bigger fan of infrastructure as a service than I am as platform as a service, software as a service. The abstraction level, how high you allow it to go, creates higher level of dependencies. Generally, the easier your coding gets, the more dependent you are on the things that made that coding so easy. So be careful who makes your coding easy. Be careful about who's making your coding easy. And see at what cost. I like Vim. I feel Microsoft dealt with the Vim threat through VS Code, and they killed two birds with one stone. They dealt with the Vim code with the VS Code, and they also, three birds with one stone. They dealt with the Jupyter Labs threat with VS Code, and they filled a hole in the text editor space that looked like it was preliminarily going to be filled by Atom, ATOM, the Atom text editor, because Sublime was going out of vogue. Things go in and out of vogue, in and out of style. And, your generic text editor or IDE platforms can also be quite a bit more specialized based on your language. So a lot of people love PyCharm for this sort of thing. However, I'm a huge advocate of being a general technologist. Even with my love of Python, the world does not begin and end at Python. You want to be able to work in generic technology. And generic technology really starts at Unix shell scripts. Unfortunately, most tech starts at Unix shell scripts because the startup procedure of any Linux or Unix system is going to be taken what's in a text file and start carrying out the commands as it finds them laid out in that text file. So, you take control of that text file, you take control of the startup of the machine. You take control of the startup of the machine, you take control of the machine. You set what context it's going to be running in. Is it a web server? Is it running services? Is it running scheduled tasks? And that is where a lot of the power comes in being a generic tech person these days. You're not a generic tech person if you can't take control of that Frankenstein moment of a piece of hardware coming alive and making it do your bidding in what I would consider the more old school way. You're going to be exposed to Unix/Linux commands. You're going to be exposed to some concept of a start script control is going to be handed over from some inescapable system A, because it's how the hardware boots, to some system B of greater choice of your choosing, to potentially a system C that makes things as easy and high level and abstract and remote administratable and heartbeats, uptime monitoring, fine-tuning of performance, and so on. Other instances that can run anywhere, that can be plugged in anywhere. These days you would plug them into the cloud on, say, Kubernetes clusters. You don't have to understand Kubernetes yourself to take advantage of other people running the clusters. So, the ability to make a container excuse me. Yeah, I see what I have to wet my throat when it is out of reach. So I will play it safe. And go easy on my throat here. Yeah, it's a good place to wrap up. It's been a wonderful vacation, and I am soon gonna be home. It's about 1:30 a.m. I had my people over on the West Coast bopping around the Pacific and Disneyland, surviving a stingray sting, having the real Alice Dorothy adventures, leaning towards the Dorothy end because meeting people along the way who are out to help you. Shout out to the lifeguard system and people of the Crystal Cove State Park Reservation near Laguna Beach. Thank you. They were really great to my daughter. We have some great shots of them picking them up and carrying them over to where their foot was soaking in the hot water, and they were fun to talk to and kill the time of the treatment. We unfortunately didn't get a chance to do the hiking that we had hoped to do, and my apologies to my wife Nat. 3 hiking opportunities that turned out to be strikeouts because of events beyond our control. We got a little bit of the sniffles and sore throat on the trip. Pretty sure it's not COVID because I've been vaccinated and I caught from my daughter whatever she had. So maybe I'll get the at-home test and run it. But I'm pretty sure this is just typical stuffed nose, sore throat passing. I got the Moderna, so it covers a bunch of the strains, so that's why I think that. And let's see, what else going on? I don't know. I'm just shooting the breeze here. I thought I was going to wrap it up, but I got a second wind on my throat. Get second wind, use second wind. So these long drives, yeah, so wow. This trip has really been a test of my ability, my endurance. So we ended up doing Philly International, which is a 2-hour drive from where I live in the Poconos. I might have rethought that in the future and done maybe Newark would have been the logical one to fly out of, considering being close to New York or New Jersey from where I live. But I did Philly International and reacquainted myself with a lot of old blast from the past stuff, man. I used to drive into that airport in my Mustang convertible, Philadelphia side, to do business trips for Commodore when I was like 18 years old, 18, 19, 20, up through just about 21. I probably did my last trip for Commodore in my 20s. But this lasted right up till graduating college for the most part. I remember my last Commodore paycheck. I wasn't quite one of the last rats, but I was part of the group of people where I was part-time and at a distance already, just occasionally coming in and logging hours, that they didn't even bother to like pink slip me. I was part-time and I stopped submitting hours and I stopped working for Commodore Computers. It was very informal because everything was falling apart there by that time. I was only with Commodore for about 4 or 5 years, and in that amount of time I think I had 4 or 5 different bosses, people who I answered to going up progressively until I was answering to, you know, I guess department general managers and stuff, top of the company type things, and then I no longer worked for Commodore. And so I had some pretty remarkable days, and I did all this commuting from the Philly suburbs. I was living wherever my dad lived. After my parents divorced, my dad lived in a series of apartments in the Philadelphia area. The Belmont exit from Schuylkill Expressway. It was some really interesting experiences. I've lived enough places now at 50 years old that I don't even remember everywhere I lived. But that was certainly the last place that I drove the Mustang convertible to before it got totaled and I had to switch to another car. Someone hit me from behind. And so ended my blue 1973 Mustang convertible refurbished days. I refurbished it with my own hands. And so on these 2 California trips, because this latest one was the second one, I was talking about how VidCon was canceled and we kept the travel arrangements and just decided to play up Disneyland and play up the West Coast, which is what we did very successfully. And you might say it imprinted, it surely imprinted upon Addie. This is going to be something she'll never forget, being stung by a stingray in the Pacific Ocean on a state reserve. And yeah, so mission accomplished. We turned that into the West Coast vacation. Oh, getting back. This is the final wrapping up. I have her dropped off on that side. I'm coming back home on this side. My wife's adventures, those are her to tell. If she ever wants to, maybe I'll invite her into these videos. But boy, the Alice and Dorothy way of looking at the world is important. More people ought to do it, because there are windows of time that pass through our lives when we become self-aware in that uniquely human meta way. Learn to use language, learn more about who we are, decide more about who we are, face challenges and decide what we're made of. Oh, and that's one of the places I was going. My child stung in the foot by a stingray. We still have the needle about it, or the barb. We'll be putting it in resin for some sort of, keepsake charm for her. It's apparently very rare to have still kept, to have recovered the Stinger part. So I very much defended that coming home to make sure it didn't get destroyed or misplaced, because we're into those setting things in resin kits, so that'll be a project for us. And my child has their stories coming together. They'll be able to talk about those times when she was 10 years old, turning 11, her second time in Disneyland, although her first time is barely memorable, but it was with her trip to VidCon, which was a little more memorable. There's certainly photographs, and I guess her recollections of images of stuff like the inflatable airhouse obstacle course, that kind of thing. But this time out there, Pacific Ocean twice, in the time range of an oil spill, with special events set up by Nat. She set up a few great events. We were at a ocean mammal rescue facility where they rescue the seals and the sea lions. And we met some seals and some sea lions. I forget their names, but there were 3 of them in there, which was a very low population level. We were there while it was slow, so it was slow and quiet. And they all talk about how loud it gets there during peak season when there's 10 or 20 of them, and they're all making noises at the same time, trying to outshout each other. So right now it was just 3, 2 that were somewhat bonded, and then 1 that was ready for release. However, his release was being delayed because of an oil spill that had taken place recently out there near Laguna Beach. And so yeah, it should be fairly deeply imprinted on their psyche now, on both of their psyches now, my child and my wife, really, that they're West Coast people as well. They've been to the West Coast. My child has been to the West Coast twice. The first time for a conference in Disneyland, and it didn't really feel much like the West Coast, and all those iconic things like seeing the sunset over the ocean did not really occur on that first trip. But I was one adult with that child, and it was our first long-term traveling experience together, and to bank any sort of success was to be a success. So I did not go out of my way for side adventures. This time, I went very much out of my way for side adventures. Being that the conference was canceled right out of the gate, Nat sprung into action with mostly the Airbnb experiences system, which is really good. And we did a walk through the park in LA with a Hollywood sign, although we never reached the Hollywood sign. We started walking rescue dogs. So it was a real rescue theme. First it was rescue seals, and then it was rescue dogs. So the seals went really well. We had the full experience. I got to do my Airbnb ratings of these experiences. But the rescue dogs, we did not have the full experience because Addie was very much under the weather. So we started the walk, but we had to turn around from that hike and just to go back to the car and go back to the hotel room and have a relaxed day. I think that might even have been a Disney day. It was, and I released the reservation. Oh, those reservations at Disneyland. I think it's a lot easier at Disney World because of their greater capacity. But at Disneyland, it was quite a big surprise that you both needed reservations for a day, for a particular day, and tickets. It was a double system, double entry, reservations and tickets. And on their system, like the day before, oh my God, I was full of terror. it looked like every day was not available, that there was no reservation days available in this week-long time slot that I booked to be there on the West Coast. From my experience with Disneyland 2 years prior and Disney World over the years, I knew that you could just buy tickets, that you didn't have to close it in, but with a limited availability. Well, these times they adjusted their system to only let X number of people into the park at any time, and I almost colossally screwed up this whole vacation. But it turned out that the typical Disney hyper-competitive systems were in play, and if you just sat on the app waiting for cancellations, you could generally get whatever day you wanted, and we had no shortage of Disney. In fact, I think we might have overloaded on it a bit. We got to so many of the exhibits. Some of the new ones, like the Star Wars one, where you fly the Millennium Falcon, and all the old school ones, which were surprising. I was talking about the Song of the South and how, wow, you can really tell Disneyland from Disney World. Now, me having had a few trips now to both, Disneyland is a bit dingier, smaller, older, and I was clued in that there are purists, that there's Disney original experience purists that protect the old park in the way it was. The whole Tomorrowland and Space Mountain and the old exhibits, especially Splash Mountain with the Song of the South. I mean, really? Song of the South still these days in a major theme park from a reputable company? Very interesting. So I made sure Addie drank it in because, you're not going to see that kind of stuff a lot. That's a part of the past that's going to fade away. For better or for worse, it's part of a story of who we are, that we were able to make light of the experiences of slaves and show them having a zippity-doo-dah day. We got to remember that as well, do the commentary on it, make sure people understand it in perspective. And there's really good lessons in the Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox, Brer Bear stories. And maybe even one of the highlights of this whole vacation was verbally talking through, telling my wife, my daughter, my wife, my child, the story of Brer Rabbit, who didn't want to be thrown into the briar patch. And that's how Splash Mountain, being thrown into the briar patch, is a thing. The laughing place. I'll show you the laughing place. And reverse psychology, interesting lessons in life. But it has to be explained to you to understand what's going on, the context of what's going on around you. They have Brer Bear hanging. That's one of the things from my childhood growing up. Now, my childhood growing up, my first Disney trip, I was probably about 6 years old with a family. I hardly remember any of it, but I have vague recollections of Brer Bear hanging. So I must have seen that exhibit when I was 6 years old. I must have gone to the old school Splash Mountain when it was at Disney World before they tore out the Song of the South theme there. And how that was part of a story where a rabbit assaults someone made up to look like a little black boy made out of tar that they called a tar baby. And that is ultimately how Brer Fox and Brer Bear capture Brer Rabbit for tying him up and throwing him into the briar patch. They were going to eat him. And Brer Rabbit uses his wit to go, oh, well, they don't want to just eat me, they want to make me suffer. because I've caused them so much pain in trying to capture me over the years. How can I make them think they'll get the greatest joy out of making me suffer while I can still escape? Well, I will beg them to do anything they want to me, except don't throw me into that briar patch. Which is, of course, where it's full of thorns, it looks scary, but it's where Brer Rabbit grew up and was familiar with, and it was his happy place. And so he convinces Brer Fox and Brer Bear to throw him into the briar patch, thereby affecting his escape. So goes the story of Brer Rabbit and the Song of the South, which we'll have to get somehow so she can see the whole story. I don't think they play it on Disney Plus, but I think I may be able to dig it up somewhere. It might be a BitTorrent thing. Did I say that out loud? I really haven't BitTorrented in years. The need to do all that stuff has gone away since we started paying our media overlords for the right to stream. Better copies on more devices, easier to manage the process. You get the value out of it. It goes into your Amazon library, you play it anywhere. Even Apple TV is playable over Best Buy smart TVs. Insignia brand, which is what I have. Which is amazing. I gotta say, it's quite a surprise to have Apple TV on an Android-based smart TV. Didn't think that was going to happen. I got to catch up on the Foundation series. I started watching it. I signed up for that, whatever it was, 2 years free, year free. It's some large amount of time free on Apple TV. Enough time free to make you do it, to make you give it a chance, because Apple knows that's what they have to do to compete in this increasingly competitive piecemeal, is that what you would call it? Chinese menu digital services. You can't even call them cable channels anymore. Because when you sign up for a Disney Plus or a Netflix or whatever, it's an app that you install on whatever device, and it's not just these streaming movies. There's all kinds of interactivity. It could be games if they wanted it to be. So, it's digital services. Fill in the blank of services. It's mostly streaming movie services, but, there's Hulu, there's, is it Paramount? What is the one that I do one more to get my Star Trek? Which I might undo now that I see that some Star Trek is on Apple TV, but I don't think all of it. There's Picard, there's, I think, Voyager. Is it Voyager? I forget the names of all these different Star Treks. And the stories are getting wacky too. Boy, I'll tell you, these Red Angel stories with, Spock's histories. I don't know if I like it, but they're getting all wacky. But I do like experimental, so I like them testing these things out. The tardigrades and the mycelial network, it's all very fascinating. Interesting sci-fi, if not good sci-fi. So I'll wrap up before I start talking about sci-fi, because boy, I could go on. We started watching Dune over HBO Plus, Max, another one of the services. I decided to recently give a chance to catch up on all my DC stuff. So yeah, really wrap up, because I'll be home soon. Yeah, thanks for joining me. Successful epic vacation, successfully banked, everyone home safely, everyone fed, good memories, potentially bad memories turned good, all kinds of wins. Win, win, win. These wins are paid for with sharp stabs. This latest sharp stab unfortunately hit my daughter, my kid, my child. And oh my goodness, I won't go into sharp stab stories, but you know, karma. I like to think I'm not superstitious, but I think maybe that I am, and that I know that when things are going too well for too long, some jab is going to occur, some crazy jab is going to occur that won't kill you, but will make you very reflective and thoughtful and thankful, and ramp up your precautionary steps, your observation and scanning to prevent the stabs, your emergency medical abilities to deal with them once they occur. But this stingray sting is right in line with what I've found to be my experiences over my 51 years of life with, you know, it's not every ounce of pleasure paid for with an ounce of pain, but there is a ratio, and you have to be aware of it. And when you're on a good stretch, you just got to be alert and be on the defense, because things catch you from the most unexpected directions. That's where someone would sideswipe me in the car, and yes, be one of those YouTube videos. But it's not, because thankfully, driving and talking are two very multitaskable things. Not everything is multitaskable in the human experience, but the alertness, what goes on in your brain when you're talking, and what goes on in your brain while you're scanning, visually scanning, even with this light going on here. Maybe I'll turn it off at this point. It's probably better for driving, not as good for the video. But they're highly compatible, because I'm not sure what it is, the neurochemical signals, but whatever happens in your brain when you're talking in the flow, in a deeply engaged state, it also helps your visual observation skills, scanning out on the road, looking all around you all the time. I bet it has something to do with how we had to communicate as a tribe, as a group, as you know, when we were following the herd. Communication as nomadic packs. Communication as nomads, nomadic communication was probably very important, kept us alive. So being able to communicate quickly while on the move, probably genetically selected for, would be my guess. Oh boy. Is Wendy's still open? I'm not going to get it, but just curious. Yeah. Hour and a half, 2-hour drive each way to drop off my kid these days, because I've decided to live up in the Poconos through these strange days, have outdoor activities, have her own room, have more space for the money, swimming facilities, that kind of stuff. Go-karts around the corner. We have a lot of really fun and interesting activities that can keep that child engaged, her mind stimulated, and broadening her experiences. I did get the canoe rides down the Delaware in this season. Back to that one not long before the trip. But we each have boats. There's the big family canoe that can probably seat up to 4 that I bought from my old college professor, who does the reversible logos. Incredible person. John Langdon. You should Google him. John Langdon and Ambigrams. He's who I got our family canoe from. And then we now have 2 kayaks. A traditional one-person kayak, and then a sit-on-top little kayak for the kid. And Nat and Addie were canoed or kayaked down the Delaware a couple of weeks ago, and I dropped them off at one access point and picked them up at another access point, something like 2 hours down the river for them, but like 5-minute drive for me. So I hung out waiting for them. It was a wonderful time, and yeah, lots of missions accomplished, lots of experiences that I wish my father had been able to carve out for me. And through a combination of my career choices and my initiative on taking action as things went down, made it possible for me to make these experiences for them. And they might not be as social as some might be, but I personally was never a social person. I always enjoyed my own company more than the company of others. And it looks like she's turning out to be greatly that way, and reinforced with electronics the way that is these days. That becomes kind of an asset, a power, the ability to keep yourself entertained and self-stimulate. With or without electronics, I'm going to try and start to work on that with her, because your mind is the ultimate app, right? All of these other things are doing is like making subsets of things that are possible already within your mind. If you can experience it, then you could imagine it, and you could have experiences like that in your head proactively if you just ran a little simulation of the iPhone or whatever in your head. Apple would probably prevent that with licensing if they could. So there we have it. Now I really will wrap up. There's been a few false alerts. We're an hour and an hour and almost 20 minutes into this video. It's almost my entire return trip. So thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.